How many of you like to assemble things? Like when you see assembly required or the famous some assembly required in one of those boxes you get for somebody for Christmas, or that you receive any average day at your house from Amazon Prime, or like whenever it is, birthday. Like if there's like a little bit of assembly required, how many of you you kind of enjoy putting it together? Maybe you use the instructions, maybe you don't. Let me see your hands. All right, that is unbelievable. How many of you would say someone you're married to or close to loves things that require a little bit of assembly? It gets them a little bit riled up. All right. For all those of you that raise your hands, and for those of you that raise your hands on behalf of someone else, this is a genuine question this morning. What is wrong with you? Like to what you're thinking, what is wrong with you? I don't like to assemble things. Have you ever assembled anything from IKEA? It's like translating hieroglyphics, right? Mine never looks anything even remotely like the picture when I'm done. And like there's the whole anecdotal, you always have a few pieces left. It's like, no, I have like half of the pieces left when I'm done. So this is my favorite some assembly required instructions image. This is how I feel every time I'm assembling something. So it's like, no, just you're going to have to put a couple things together. You open the box, and it's just like a chunk of wood. This is the way I feel every time I assemble something. Now, here's my question as we kind of launch in this morning. How many of you, if you were to be honest with yourself, how many of you feel this way a little bit, and you don't have to answer, especially if you're sitting with your spouse or your kids. In fact, don't. How many of you feel this way a little bit when it comes to relationships? Particularly when you bump into a bump, when there's a curve in the road, when there's something expected where you go, you know what, I'm not sure that I have all of the instructions. I'm not sure I know how to follow the instructions. I'm not sure there were any instructions, or there were instructions for the original assembly, but now it's broken and I don't know how to put it back together. I don't know how to reassemble it. Like if there's ever a moment where you land in something where it's just like, there's a dust up. Now, I know this probably hasn't happened to you, but just imagine that happens to someone you know in a relationship. There's a little dust up. There's a miscommunication. Someone said some words that they shouldn't have said. Something happened. And before you know it, you're just in a space where you don't quite know how to put it all back together. Or sometimes it's not when there's a dust up. Sometimes it's when you encounter or you face something that's new. I remember one time when I was many years ago, I had teenage daughters in the house, and for those of you that don't know our dynamic, we're a family of 6, 4 of which are female, and if you include the 2 female dogs, that's 6 out of 8 females in our house. And I came home one night late, was heading in, like just sliding in right as kind of dinner was getting set, came to the dinner table, and I don't want to make it utopian. We didn't always sit around the dinner table as a family. We tried to at least 1 or 2 nights a week, but we all sat down around the table, started to eat, and there was just like, it was just something was not okay. Like everybody's like a little bit edgy, everybody's just a little bit angry at one another, like there was just like some kind of dark cloud hanging over the table, and the tipping point hit when there was tears over past the potatoes. Right? Has this ever happened in any of your household? And I was sitting here, and normally I would just assume responsibility. Like I would just say, hey, I did it. Like, because usually I did. Like, usually I said something, did something. I'm a little unaware about the relational climate, the emotional climate in the room. And so usually I just own it. But at this moment, I was like, no. I haven't even been home long enough to have caused whatever is happening, right? So like I just like there's just this funk over our table, and so I just said, "Hey, what is happening, and why is everybody crying?" So then I just happened to catch the eye of my wife sitting next to me. She's giving me that look that all of you women innately have the ability to give this look, and the look was immediately followed with the abort, like. And here's what was happening. I'm like, I got this. I have no idea what's happening, but that's all right. I don't need any information. I'm just going to solve this, right? Like typical male fashion, I'm just going in. I'm like, I got this. And my wife's like, but you don't. Like, you have no idea what you're doing. And you're about to make this whole thing worse. And I was, so I listened to my wife. This was a moment in my life where I was navigating something new, something unfamiliar. And the same thing often happens to us in relationships. Like when you're navigating a bump, a miscommunication, let's call it, something happens. Or when you just find yourself in a new space. I remember when Angie and I had been married about 6 years, so we were experts, right? So we've been married about 6 years. We've been married 26 years now, or coming up on 26 years. I remember coming into a space where, like, we just hit a bump, and we couldn't, like, our communication stuff was not going right. And I remember thinking, like, before that, I'm like, we got this, man. 6 years, we got this thing dialed in, and then we didn't. We hit a new dynamic, a new reality. Things change within the same relationship. And when that happens, it doesn't always just happen in romantic relationships. This happens at work. This happens with family members. This happens with, again, friend groups, like the people that you work with. All of the different relationships in your life, this can happen where all of a sudden you find yourself hitting a bump, or you hit something new or a dynamic that's different, and then the conversation changes. Something happens, or the atmosphere shifts. There's that one person that as a family, when their name comes up, that uncle, that aunt, that cousin, whoever it is, that brother, when their name comes up, like the atmosphere of the room just shifts a little bit. And everybody kind of navigates around them. Or there's that friend group that you thought we're going to be friends forever. And then all of a sudden you find yourself on the outside looking in. Or you were in favor with your boss and then you weren't. You had a best friend and then you didn't. And in all of those situations where there's a dust up, there's something broken. What's interesting, and I said this last week as we kicked off this series, someone else looking at your relationship, looking at your dynamic. Again, whether it's a family member that's now an estranged family member, or looking at that relationship, that friend relationship, or that working relationship, when they look at it, they would go, hey, this is kind of silly. You guys just work it out, right? Just text them. Just call them. Just go have lunch with them. But it's never quite that simple. And here's one of the reasons why. Reassembling a broken relationship is a learned skill. This is not something that we naturally know. In fact, sometimes it's like, I don't know if there are instructions, or I don't know if I just don't know how to read the instructions, or I wasn't prepared for this part of it. But listen, reassembling a broken relationship is a learned skill. And most of us, not only were we not taught this, it was not modeled for us in our household. So for us, we don't know how to do this. We don't know what to do with this. And I said last week, I come to this conversation and this entire series, I come as a student in the journey, not as an expert. But here's what I do. I stand on the authority of God's word. And it's a powerful thing as we navigate relationships. So I want to give you a little bit of a quick review before we dive into the content for today. This series is really about this word reconciliation. Now, I gave a working definition. This is a Bible word. It's probably not a word you use in kind of everyday language, but the Greek word that's behind this in the New Testament kind of carries this idea. So here's the definition, 3 parts to it. It's restoring a broken relationship. That's really the essence. We're talking about reconciliation. We're talking about taking something that's broken and putting it back together, reassembling it. That's what we're talking about. The second part is a restoration to favor. And I said last week, have you ever been the favorite employee? Some of you are like, no, but like that sounds fun. But if you have, or if you were ever the favorite child, or you're the favorite in something, you're the favorite athlete on the sports team, the coach loves you, and then you all of a sudden weren't. You're like, wait a second, I don't like not being the favorite, right? You want to get back into favor. That's the idea of reconciliation. It's like there's favor and you want to be restored to favor. And then the last part of it says the act of bringing about agreement or harmony. And I said last week that there's another really big Bible concept or idea that we find throughout the New Testament. This is the word confession. And the Greek word confession has this idea. It says that confession means that we agree with God about our sin. We agree with God that our sin is present and that our sin has broken the relationship. The same idea follows with reconciliation. Reconciliation is when we come to an agreement about brokenness. Not necessarily about why it's broken, maybe not even necessarily about the pathway forward, but reconciliation is when we come to an agreement. Both parties come to an agreement that the relationship is actually worth fighting for. Now, here's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons that we're talking about this in depth. One of the many reasons that this idea of reassembly matters. We are only as happy as our core relationships are healthy. Now, this is not original to me. I don't know where this original quote came from, but this is true. There's a direct correlation between the happiness and the contentness of your life and the health of your core relationships. This is one of the reasons that if you've ever been to a counselor, a lot of times counselors will try to establish a baseline for the conversation by understanding your family of origin, because they know there's this thing that's going on. They'll ask you a lot of questions about your present family, if you're in a marriage, about your marriage, about your children. If you're a child, they'll ask you about your parents. This is it. They're trying to establish a baseline because this is true. We're only as happy as our core relationships are healthy. I remember years ago bumping into Psalm chapter 32, verse 3. The psalmist is talking, and he indicates that unconfessed sin actually affects our lives and affects our health specifically. He talks about how it affects the bones. Like when we haven't come to agreement with God about the fact that our sin breaks the relationship, it literally affects our health. That's what the psalmist says. Similarly, broken relationships affect our health. There was this study done in a British civil service group, 9,000 people, said that those that reported adverse close relationships, like it's not going well, they had a 34% increase in the risk of developing heart problems. That is a massive jump. 34% chances that you're going higher chances that you're going to have problems with your heart attack, heart disease. There were findings from another study in the University of Michigan that actually confirmed this, and then they noted significant effects also on the entire cardiovascular system. And check this out. This won't be surprising, but maybe also the immune system. Like when relationships aren't going good, it literally affects us physically. Like your ability to fight off sickness goes down. In other words, if I have a broken relationship this morning, it is affecting you. As Cy would say, it's a fact, Jack. Like it's affecting you. Like there's no way that you can have a broken relationship, say, you know what, but we put it off to the side. I know we haven't talked to them in 20 years. I know I haven't talked to my husband or wife for a week, or we've been sleeping on separate sides of the house or the bedroom or whatever it is, but we're fine. No, it's affecting you. If your relationship with your parents is off, it is affecting you. If your relationships with your coworkers are off, it is affecting you, and it's affecting you physically as well. The overarching idea for this entire series that we hit last week, and I just want to recap, comes when Paul was talking to one of the churches in Philippi. He said this in Philippians 2:5. He said, in all your relationships, in all of them, in all your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. Paul's saying this. He's saying, I want you to approach your relationships, all of them, every relationship in your life. I want you to approach it as Jesus did or as Jesus would, which we said last week begs the question, what did Jesus do? Like, what was the mindset of Jesus? And here was the core, and I'm not going to re-preach last week's message. I would encourage you to go back and watch. But the core of it was this, that Jesus' mindset always pushed him towards. He always moved towards the broken. He always moved towards the broken party. He always took responsibility to go first. Like Jesus was never content just to forgive. We said this last week. You can forgive from a distance, but you cannot restore a broken relationship from a distance. Now, this sounds counterintuitive, but the goal of all of this is not reconciliation, even though the series is about reconciliation. And the reason is this. We said last week, this is like my mom's broken vase. It's a 35-year cold case mystery. We still don't know who broke it. Maybe we'll find out one day. But my mom's broken vase, if in theory I can find all the pieces of a broken vase, I can put it back together. I can restore it, right? But reconciliation is different. Because you and I, when it comes to broken relationships, we don't have access to all of the pieces. Some of the broken pieces are with you, no doubt, but some of them are with the other person. And so we don't make a goal for another person. The goal isn't reconciliation. This may sound subtle, but this is really important. Reconciliation is the win. That's the outcome that we want, but it's not the goal. Here's the goal. The goal is no regrets. The goal is for you and I to be able to live at peace with ourselves, to live with no regrets. And we hope, we dream, the win is that there will be reconciliation, but it cannot be the goal. So we're going to continue today, and I want to give you the big idea right out at the beginning. Here's the big idea today. Reassembly begins with me. And I want us to say this all together out loud on the count of 3. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Begin. Now, I just made some of you say something you don't believe. Some of you said something that you don't want to believe. Some of you said something you don't want to do. Some of you said something that you actually want someone else to say to you. But here's the deal. This is the reality when it comes to reassembling broken relationships. I'm going to try and prove that, or actually Paul is going to prove that today, that reassembly begins with me. And here's the big challenge. I want to get to the end and tell you the big challenge. And this isn't just the big challenge for you. This is the big challenge for me as well, is to get us to surrender our desire, or perhaps it's bigger than desire. Maybe you would argue that it's a right, that in light of what has happened, you have a right to get even. I want to challenge us today to surrender our desire or our right to get even. So we're going to go hard and fast at this today. This is going to be a challenge, but here's what I would just say. As we dive in a second, we're going to read some scriptures. Would you be open? Would you just be open to what God might want to do in you, and what God might want to do through you, and how it might actually, if you and I lean into this, how it might actually liberate us. So Paul is talking in the passage we're about to read to a group of people in Rome, in the book of Romans. He's talking to a group of people in Rome that are having a conflict with one another. This is not new to us. It's not just happening in your household or at your work. It happens everywhere. He's talking to a group of people that are having a conflict, and there's no indication that Paul ever actually made it to Rome, which this is a fascinating part of the story to me. This means that what we're going to read today, Paul said it to a group of people he'd never actually met. And so when you hear this, what I'm going to say today, through the lens of this was said to a group of people he did not know and perhaps had never met face to face, then you realize how much more intense and how much more direct all of this really is. And what Paul's doing is he's getting at this idea that we introduced last week that I just recapped. He's getting at this idea of what does it look like to have the mindset of Christ when it comes to relationships. And this is where he picks up in Romans chapter 12, verse 9. He says, love must be sincere. He just comes out of the gate swinging. He says, hey, first of all, let me just say, no faking, no pretense. Sadly, Sunday mornings, 9:30, 11, across the globe, there's arguably as much, if not more, faking going on than any other time or place on the planet. This is what we do. We act like everything is okay, even when it isn't. We act like relationships are okay, even when they're not. And we give ourselves every reason and all sorts of permission not to address the thing, whatever the thing is. Christians do this. We give ourselves permission to say, you know what, well, when it comes to a relationship, we give ourselves permission. You know what, I tried. I called once. I texted. They never texted back. They're never going to change. Like, I know them. I know that no matter what I say, it's not going to change anything. And we give ourselves we do this internal dialogue, and we give ourselves all kind of permission to stay in the place where we are. And we smile, and we say, good morning. And we keep the conversations at the level of, how's the weather? Man, the leaves are beautiful. Wow, the leaves are falling off, right? And we keep it at surface level. And here's what Paul, he comes straight in. Remember, he doesn't know these people. He comes straight in. Out of the gate, he says, hey, if you want to have the mindset of Christ, if you want to love the way Jesus loved, because that was the command, hey, as I have loved you, I want you to love. Then he says, you have got to get real. Like, step one, you got to get real. You got to get real about what hurt you. You got to get real about what it caused, the damage that's there. It's amazing to me how many adults will avoid at all cost an uncomfortable conversation. It is my tendency as well. Paul's saying, hey, you got to get real. You got to be sincere. Now, we probably could just stop here and say, all right, you guys go work on that this week, and we'll come back and pick up there next week, right? But Paul continues, so we'll continue as well. He continues, he says, hate what is evil and cling to what is good. This is really powerful. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. He's saying, hey, you got to redirect your hate. Right now, if you feel something, you feel some energy around a thing or what happened or what they did to you, he said, I want you to redirect the hate from someone to something. This is like a really, really big concept that we miss. He says, I want you to hate what happened, not the person. But that's not very emotionally satisfying, is it? In fact, that's why most of us, even though you hear this morning, you won't do it. Because there is a little bit in us that, like, there's a guilty pleasure with a grudge. Like, no, I just want to, I don't know. It's them. It's not what they did. I'm mad at them. But Paul's saying, hey, listen, hate what is evil and cling to what is good. Hate what happened, but not the person. Then he continues. He says, be devoted. Then I want you to just read that word, those two words. Be devoted to who? Say it again. Be devoted to who? He says, in love, honor, say it again, above ourselves. Now, these last 5 words, if the world did those 5 words for 30 days, if your family just took those 5 words and embraced them for 30 days, if your work culture took those 5 words and embraced them for 30 days, all would be unrecognizable. Just this, to honor one another above ourselves. Can you imagine what the next election season would look like? Can you imagine what our communities would look like? Can you imagine what your next marital conflict, friendship conflict would look like if we just did that? Honor one another above ourselves. Now, this idea, and the reason I had you read these words, one another, this idea is all throughout the New Testament. Jesus says it often. All of the authors of the New Testament say it often. And I don't have time to go into this in detail today. It would actually be a great series. But it's based on this really big theological concept of the Imago Dei. This is one of the most foundational things in all of Christianity. The Imago Dei is the idea that every single human being, me, you, and everybody you know, the people you love and the people that, you have a broken relationship with, they're all made in the image of God. Every one of them. Made in the image of God. And this is foundational. So he would say, hey, what that means is there's no one another in your life that you get to hate because they're made in the image of God. Foundationally, as a follower of Jesus, if you are a follower of Jesus this morning, this is a really, really massive concept. It means that we cannot, it makes it impossible for us to mistreat others and be okay with God because they bear his image. You bear his image. Someone can't mistreat you and be okay with God. You and I can't mistreat someone else, even though we disagree with them. They said something hateful on social media or to our faces. Still don't get to hate them because they're made in the image of God, and God died for them even if they haven't recognized him and Jesus as the Savior yet. The Imago Dei, this powerful thing. This word honor, when he says honor one another above ourselves, the New Testament word, the Greek word for honor, literally means or carries this idea of adding value. Years ago, we were shaping cultural values for our team of just how I wanted our team to interact. And this idea of honor in the New Testament shaped one of our core values, and we turned it into a question. And the question is this: how are we adding value to each other? This is the question. How are we adding value to each other? This is one of the things we say every single week, every single Tuesday when we gather. Hey, what have you done? What has someone else done? How are you adding value? And we would even say it this way: what are you doing or not doing that hurts or helps someone else? Honor is different than respect. I don't know if you know this. Respect is earned, right? But honor is given. Honor is just a gift. Honor is your choice and my choice, regardless of what they did, regardless of who they are, regardless of how they hurt you, regardless of what happened, regardless of how they took advantage of the situation or took advantage of you. Honor is within your control and my control. You can choose to add value to someone that will never be respectable. Listen, this is really big. You can choose to honor someone that is not respectable. You say, well, Chris, they're not respectable. That's why no. Honor is within your control and my control. We can add value to people who are not respectable. And here's what I would say. I would say the greatest opportunity or pathway for someone who's not respectable to become respectable is for people to honor them. It's so counterintuitive. So much of the way of Jesus is counterintuitive. He says this, he continues, and then he gives a few examples. He says this whole idea of be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above ourselves. And then he gives some examples. He says, and here's how you do it. In verse 12 and 13, he says, be joyful in hope. Like, man, who doesn't need a little bit of hope, right? Like just constantly saying, hey, we can do it. There's something else. There's more to it. Be joyful in hope. Be patient in affliction. Sometimes we just need somebody to walk with us, to stand with us, to be present in our pain. Be faithful in prayer. I had someone tell Angie and I, we went to dinner with a couple this week, and this lady said, I literally pray for you and your kids by name every week, and I believe her. Man, that's powerful. Be faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Like, who's in need? How can you help? These are all ways that you can add value, that you can honor. Practice hospitality. Invite them into your space. Let your space be disrupted. Invite them into your home. Invite them into your friend circles because they may not have a friend circle. Practice hospitality. And then he changes gears without a clutch. Verse 14, he says this. Bless those who persecute you, and bless and do not curse. Now, I got to be honest. This is one of those verses that every time I hear it in the voice of Yoda. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. As bad as my Yoda impression is, from now on, every single one of you will also read and hear this in the voice of Yoda. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Now, the Greek word bless literally means to invoke or to invite blessing. And persecute literally means to make run or to make someone flee. So if you put those together, in other words, the people that put you on your heels, the people that make you kind of do the wide turn. You start to avoid their phone call. You avoid them in the grocery aisle. You leave a little early. You stay a little late at the reunion just so you don't have to interact with them. Those people that put you on your heels, that is persecution. This is what Paul is saying. Those people, what you need to do is you need to invoke or you need to invite blessings on them. It doesn't even make sense, does it? You're like, look, it seems so impractical. You're like, listen, I don't even want to be around them. Chris, there's a reason I haven't called them. There's a reason I haven't texted them. There's a reason we moved to another state, right? The reason is I don't want to do any of this. And if you're listening to what Paul's saying, doesn't it feel like all the responsibility is on us? And the answer is yep. This is what Paul's saying. This is the mindset of Jesus. Think about it. Jesus pursued people when they were the ones, us, that broke the relationship. Jesus, he put on human flesh. He dwelt among us. He went to the cross. And who broke the relationship? Us. This is what Paul's saying. You want the mindset of Christ. This is not for the faint of heart, but if you want to live with a different kind of reality of relationships, the mind of Christ is the way to go. Listen, we were the ones who messed it up to begin with. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were the ones that messed it up to begin with, yet God comes into the garden pursuing them. This is the way of Jesus. This is the way of kingdom, the kingdom of Jesus. And it's always backwards, and it's always upside down. He continues, he says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Now remember, he's talking to people who are in relational conflict. So he's saying, I want you to rejoice even with the people who hurt you. I want you to mourn even with the people who hurt you. When they mourn, you mourn. To which isn't our internal response to say, I'm not cheering for them. I'm not going to cheer for them. Like I don't want them to succeed. They got their gain off of disrupting my life or cheating me or saying something bad about me or whatever the case is. You're like, I don't want to celebrate them. But listen, Paul is not giving them, he's not giving us a free pass. He says, look, you got to rejoice when the people who hurt you hurt you. You got to celebrate their success. And here's what I would say. This is so hard. If we can't, if you can't, if I can't, it's just an indicator that we still have work to do. He says, I want you to mourn when the people who hurt you mourn. If we silently celebrate their demise, if we kind of silently find satisfaction when they are failing, then we still have work to do in embracing the mindset of Jesus. Let me give you this one thing that I thought about as I was walking through this. The mindset of Jesus isn't something you strive for. If you're a follower of Jesus and you put your faith in him, you already have it. You just have to access it. Like, you don't try to have the mind of Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, that has already been downloaded. It can be your operating system. We just have to access it. He continues. He says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud. Pride tends to lead with, let me explain. Like, let me explain what happened. Let me tell you why I didn't show up. Let me tell you why that hurt me. Let me tell you why I haven't called them. Let me tell you why. It tends to lead with, let me explain. But humility, the opposite, leads with, help me understand. Like, you want to say, but no, I want you to understand me. No, pride leads with, let me explain. But humility leads with, help me understand. You listen first. When you want to say, but I'm going to tell you my case, and I'm going to tell you all the reasons why you're wrong and why that hurt. But listen, he's saying, if you want to live in harmony with one another, don't be proud. Don't lead with, let me explain. Lead with, help me understand. And then Paul lands his rant, and this has been a rant. He says in verse 17, do not repay anyone evil for evil. This is the point where, depending on your story, you want to raise your hand and say, okay, but if you knew what happened to me, you would understand. If Paul, if I could take a couple of minutes and I could tell you what they did, if I could tell you what happened, because this thing was just terrible, it was awful. If I could tell you, then you would say, oh, but except for you. You're the exception to the rule. Don't repay anyone evil for evil except for that story. That one actually deserves it, right? That's what we feel like. Maybe some of you, depending on the severity of the brokenness in a relationship or what happened to you at work, maybe they stole your idea, maybe they stole your business, I don't know. Maybe they stole something more than that. You say, but if you understood my story. But here's what's interesting. Paul didn't know any of these people. He didn't know any of their stories. So on a macro level, while their stories on a macro level, their stories mattered. But on a micro level, he's like, it doesn't really matter, because no matter what your story is, this is the right way moving forward regardless of what your story is. One of my favorite Bible teachers through the years, a guy named Chuck Swindoll. Chuck Swindoll told the story of an 83-year-old that was in the drive-thru at the McDonald's. There's a lot of them in the drive-thru at McDonald's, right? 83-year-olds in the drive-thru. He said, the 83-year-old said he was ordering, and he said, I was going a little bit slow. Everything in my life is a little bit slow. And the person behind me got angry, honked the horn, and so I pulled through to the first window, and when I got there, I just paid for my meal and I paid for their meal. Said, I thought to myself, this is a great way to let them know, just to repay their hostility and their evil with something good. He said, then I pulled forward to the next window, and I could see the person behind me had gotten to the window and realized I had paid for it, and probably felt a little bit embarrassed, and they were kind of waving, trying to get my attention, and kept mouthing, thank you, thank you, thank you. He said, I pulled up to the next window. He said, and as I was there, I showed him the ticket where I'd paid for both the meals, and I took both the meals and I drove away. He said, then they would have to go all the way around the line and do it again. It's not how you thought that story was going to end, is it? He said, we're 83. We've been living for a while. Don't mess with us. It's human nature to want to get even. It just is. But it doesn't actually get you even. He says, when he says, do not repay anyone evil for evil, repay literally means to get even. It's human nature. Paul says that Jesus' way is different. This is the mindset of Jesus. Surrender our desire or right. Maybe you have a right. Maybe you have a legal right. I don't know. Surrender your desire or right to get even. And let me tell you what will happen. It'll liberate you. It'll liberate me. This is super challenging. This message in particular has been super challenging for me. So I say I come as a student on this journey. But if we do what Paul says, we don't give ourselves permission to go halfway and say, no, but Chris, I forgave them. But that's not the win. Reconciliation is the win. It can't always happen. I'll repeat what I said last week. I'm not talking about, and I acknowledge there are people that are dangerous in our lives. They're narcissistic. They're abusive. They're toxic. I'm not talking about that. Maybe that's 10% of people. I don't know. But here's what I would see. Most people in our lives that we've categorized as that, they're really not. And I'm telling you, forgiveness, you can do that from a distance. But for reconciliation, you're going to have to get your feet on the ground and you're going to have to get your hands dirty. And you're going to have to move towards someone. Last week, I gave some baby steps to reconciliation. This week, I want to push a little further. So whoever the person or persons or organization or whatever it is that comes to your mind, I'm going to give you Reassembly 2.0. Some of you should take out your phones and take a picture of these three steps. The first one is this. I want you to find a way to honor them. But Chris, I didn't say it. Paul said it. Find a way to add value to them. What's one way you can do this? The second one is this. Forgive them specifically, not generally. God, I forgave them. No, but what do you forgive them for? For not caring, for what they said, for stealing your idea, for lying to you, for betraying you? What is it specifically that you need to forgive them for? And maybe you need to say it every day until you actually believe yourself. Say it every day in prayer. And the third one is this. Surrender our desire or right to get even. And you need to say it to God in prayer. God, I'm surrendering my right. I'm surrendering my desire to get even. And say it over and over until it sticks. When we do this, we pave the way for restored broken relationships, for restoration, for reconciliation, for reassembly. Maybe it will happen, maybe not. The outcome is up to God. That's the liberating thing about this. But listen, let me tell you what will happen. This I can guarantee. When you do this, it will free you. You will be able to say, it is well with my soul. I am at peace. I've asked the band to come, and they're going to close with a song. But I want to read or tell you part of this story. There's a guy named Horatio Spafford. He was a successful attorney, real estate investor who lost a fortune in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Around that same time, he lost his 4-year-old son, died of scarlet fever. Like he's lost everything now. He's lost one of his children. And he was thinking, man, my family needs a vacation. It'll do us some good, clear our heads. So he sent his wife and his 4 daughters on a ship to England. And he was planning on joining them. He had a couple of business ventures and things that he was trying to do to get things rolling again, some pressing stuff. But while crossing the Atlantic Ocean, the ship that his family was on was involved in a terrible collision, and it sunk. More than 200 people lost their lives, including all 4 of Horatio Spafford's daughters. His wife, Anna, survived the tragedy. Upon arriving in England, she sent him a telegram. And this is what it said. It began with these words. Saved alone, what shall I do? Can you imagine? He's lost everything. Going on vacation. Saved alone, what shall I do? Horatio immediately got on a boat, set sail for England. And at one point during the trip, the captain of the ship was aware of the tragedy, aware of what happened, summoned him, said, hey, I want you to come. And he said, Horatio, we're now passing over the spot where the shipwreck occurred. And as Horatio thought about his daughters, these words of comfort and hope filled his heart and his mind. He wrote them down, and they've since become a well-known hymn. He said this, when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to know it is well with my soul. I want you to start this process as we sing. Maybe you come with a heavy heart. Maybe it has nothing to do with the relationships. Maybe it's something else. And you just, as you came in, I don't know, maybe it wasn't well with your soul. It can be. In relationships, as you take these steps, you find ways to honor them. You forgive specifically, not generally. You surrender your desire, your right to get even. If you say it, you declare it. Even in your mind, you make that decision to move in their direction. I'm telling you, in that, you can begin to embrace your peace. You can begin to say, it is well. It will be well with my soul. Maybe you sing it until it's true. So I want to pray for us, and we're going to sing this. Father, you are good. This is hard. Because, God, some of us have given ourselves permission not to address it anymore. Our relationship with you, our relationship with others. God, for some, maybe you're carrying something towards you today because you didn't answer a prayer in the way they thought. Maybe the conversation is with you. Maybe it's with an uncle. Maybe it's with an aunt. Maybe it's with a friend. Maybe it's with a coworker, with a business partner, or used to be business partner, or an ex. God, today, will you just give us a moment where your Holy Spirit